it was announced that Jose Johnson, Matt's favorite fighter, was out of his fight against Vince Morales. So in on short notice steps up Chapo, Miles Johns. You have a great fight between Fortis MMA and Syndicate and Vince Morales. It's really hard to get a read on this guy. We got to say that straight up. You look at his overall UFC run. I mean, if you even consider Dana White's Contender Series and the UFC, you want to make that stretch, he's 3-5, and he reminds me of a lot of a guy that we talked about last weekend. Mike Trizano was taking on Sung Woo Choi. Sung Woo Choi had a couple of really good performances, and everybody thought, hey, we're off to the races. Vince Morales, just 3 fights ago, he gets a win over Draco Rodriguez. He looked great in that fight. He then takes on Luis Smolka, knocks him out, and he knocked him out like cold. He looked really good. And then he took on Jonathan Martinez, and he loses. Now, I don't think all hope is lost with Vince Morales because he was a pretty big underdog against Martinez. Martinez, I think the only thing that might have surprised people was that he went for and executed on a couple of takedowns, though they didn't really do a whole lot. But for Vince Morales, this is a guy that really has based himself around having sound wrestling. He was a great wrestler in high school, wrestled a little bit in college before he had to drop out. Same thing can be said for Miles Johns. So for Morales, he's coming out of Oregon. For Miles Johns, Kansas State high school wrestling champ, wrestled and he was team captain in college as well. I think it was injuries that forced him out. Both guys have similar bases for their skills with their wrestling. So I wouldn't say they cancel each other out because I do myself think that one guy's a little bit better at wrestling than the other. But when it comes to the striking, Vince Morales is a much longer, rangier striker, whereas Miles Johns goes in and out on a straight line, doesn't really cut much for angles, and tries to throw everything in his right hand.
But that's what makes this fight so much fun. Like, if these guys do end up putting on the wrestling shoes for 50 minutes, I'm going to be genuinely interested in who does get the better of those exchanges, because although I do think Johns is the more physically strong of these two, and I do think that is going to matter if they do start to get into those wrestling exchanges, especially early on into the fight, I'll be very curious to see who can keep that going, especially in the third round, because if neither guy is able to land with some of their power shots early on, let's say Morales isn't able to get his combinations going, because that's the one thing about Morales that I think he can have a lot of confidence in himself. I like his output more, but the thing is, does he have confidence in his own output? Because if Miles Johns can really make him pay when he does open up with his own hands, I think Miles Johns can go out there and put on a performance where he throws less significant strikes, but he still gets the decision. I know we don't often see that, but not every significant strike is created equal. And for Miles Johns, I do believe he is the more heavy-handed of these two fighters, but that's why I'm so excited for this fight. I don't think either guy has bulletproof defense by any means whatsoever. Like, if Miles Johns then goes on to fight some of the upper echelon bantamweights, Piotr Yan's a bad example, but let's use Piotr Yan as an example. Like, these guys might be able to hit him with a couple shots offensively, but you're definitely going to worry about the shots coming back their way as well. What I do like out of Morales, though, what I will be very interested to see is, if he does go for takedowns early and uses his clinch early, will he be able to use the clinch effectively? Because I think if he is able to judge that distance to, okay, Miles Johns is having success in boxing range, I'm just going to go for the clinch, try to wear on him a little bit, use my body to just try to get rid of some of the explosiveness from Johns, because I see this as a fight where Johns can have success early, but I do think every minute that ticks off the clock might start to favor Vince Morales.
Well, and I don't think that's much of a hot take. You go back to Miles Johns' UFC debut against Cole Smith, Canadian, and in that fight, Johns looked good in the first round. The second round was a bit of a wash. Johns won. At the third round, Miles Johns did not look very good, and Cole Smith was, getting on his back. He was really winning out, and obviously Johns ends up winning. But the craziest part for Johns is I think a lot of people projected him to have a top 15 ceiling, and in all of his UFC fights, I'm going to just mention what the odds were in all of these fights. He fights Smith, he's a minus 145 favorite, wins that fight. Fights Mario Bautista, loses by finish, he's a minus 150 favorite in that fight. Fights Kevin A. Tividad, finishes him, minus 135, gets a bonus. He takes on Anderson Dos Santos, he's a minus 225 favorite, finishes him, gets a bonus. He takes on John Castaneda, minus 170 favorite. He loses in the third round of that fight. It's a knock him out, drag him out type of fight. So fight. For Johns, that fight that he had against Castaneda was 9-10 months ago. And if you look at it for Johns, he's taking this one on short notice. Morales is getting ready for the striker, and Jose Johnson, who's had as many amateur fights as I think anybody would feel comfortable in having, and just about as many as pro fights. But if you look at it for Morales in the UFC, yeah, I mean, it has been a little awkward. And you look at the losses, he loses to Domingo Pilarte on Contender Series, he gets finished. He loses to Benito Lopez, but he won that fight. He loses to Chris Gutierrez and Jonathan Martinez.
Joseph Martinez is pretty good.
Yeah, his wins, Eamon's a hobby. It was a tight fight, but it was in Ottawa, which is close to Montreal, so that's a good one. He beat Straco Rodriguez, and then if you look at it, he has that win over Smolka. So the camp change is always fun because he's looked great since he's moved down to Syndicate. He's looked amazing with John Wooden crew since he's moved from the Pacific Northwest. But again, when you do look at this one, Vince Morales can mix it up with the grappling, threat of the takedown, opens up his striking. He's got better volume than Miles Johns. Miles Johns is not flat-footed, but plants on his feet and throws a lot of his shots, and it really is a tricky one where Morales is the guy that cuts angles side to side and has better volume. Miles Johns moves in and out, and that was what caused Johns so many issues when he's taking on John Castaneda. Castaneda's a better leg kicker, and he's also a southpaw. Morales is not, but that's what makes this fight so tight.
It does. I like the power of Miles Johns, though, and I definitely like it early, and this is why. Vince Morales is going to play the game of Miles Johns, and that's why I like this fight so much and why I'm so excited for this fight. Both guys could win any single way that you can imagine, like submission round 1 through 3, knockout round 1 through 3, decision either way, just because they are so talented and their skill sets do complement each other so well. I will be very curious to see who goes for the first takedown, though, and who has more confidence in their own wrestling, because I can honestly say that I could see a world where either guy does have success with their own offensive wrestling, especially if Johns does get tired as the fight goes on. It could be a fight where Johns gets a takedown round 1, gets some takedowns denied in round 2, and by the time round 3 rolls around, Morales is the one who's really pressing forward and having success with his own. I just think Morales is going to walk into a lot of power shots in this fight, though. I do think that movement is almost going to be to a detriment at a certain point to where he might walk into some of those big power shots of Miles Johns. If that's the case, I like Johns' power a little bit in this fight. If Vince Morales is meeting him halfway, I think that's definitely going to be trouble.
The thing that weirds me out, one of the last pictures that Miles Johns threw out there, there's a couple shots of him kind of boxing, moving around with his coach there at Fortis, and then he's got Devils in the Details. Is it cryptic because he has knee pads on? Is that because he's going to wrestle a little bit? I don't know if it is, but that's just something to keep in mind. You have a look at the odds in this one. Johns open a -160, -140. Vince Morales open a +140s, +115. We have a look at the Tapology votes. They're a surprise to us. They are to you. One guy's a fan favorite and one guy's not. So I'm going to say over under 72.5% Miles Johns.
I think they'll be under. I think they'll be close to 50. Nope.
Way over. 361 total votes. 84% Johns, 76% by decision for the 16% that are Morales, 59% by decision. In Miles Johns' last fight, where he was a -170 favorite against Castaneda, 89% of 3,436 voters had Johns to beat Castaneda, and Johns lost that fight. So very similar circumstances in terms of where the odds open, where the fan vote is. I like Miles Johns in the matchup with the wrestling, with the power shots, with the forward movement. I don't like the fact that he never cuts angles or traditionally doesn't cut angles. He moves in on the center line. Great opportunities for Morales here. I have a lot of underdogs in this card. If you haven't realized it already, Morales isn't one of them, but it's pretty darn juicy here.
I also like Miles Johns in this matchup. Like I said for the Tapology votes, though, I look at this as a very close 50-50 fight just because both guys do excel in a lot of the same areas of MMA. But I agree with you. I like the power out of Miles Johns. I think that's really going to be the thing that helps him.
Both of us going with Chapo Miles Johns to get the win. Let us know who you have in the matchup down below in the comments section. Some big fights left on this card. Jack Della Maddalena is taking on Danny Roberts. That should be a good one. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.